just to welcome you all so much. Thank you very much for coming this evening to a riveting and enriching talk with Iain McGilchrist and Mattias Desmet. This is entitled The Modern World, Totalitarianism and the Brain. So welcome everybody, and I shall hand over to Iain.
Yeah, there we are. Well, I hope everybody is now muted, and we'll carry on without further ado. I'm really pleased and honoured that Mattias is here for a conversation. We have met before, both virtually and in the flesh, so to speak. And I was very excited when I first read his book on totalitarianism, and dreamt that one day we would have a conversation, and now we're having one. So there we go. What I think I'd like, really, our topic today is the modern world and totalitarianism and the brain. So you and I are both psychologists, or I'm a psychiatrist or a psychologist. We know about the brain, but we're both very concerned about what's happening to society in terms of a soft, or in my view, not so soft totalitarianism, which I think is accelerating fast. So without more ado, I'd like you, Mattias, to start by talking for, say, 10 minutes or more about your views on that rather large topic.
Yes, well, Iain, likewise, I feel very honored to be here, and well, 10 minutes you said. I like lectures of more than 3 hours, but
okay, I do too. Take your time, be as long as you like, and then I will respond, and then we can have a conversation. Yes,
you know, yes, well, for me, so as you. Some people might know I wrote this book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, and I explained in that book that I believe that at the moment, in this era, in Western culture, we are witnessing we are seeing the emergence of a new kind of totalitarianism, which might be the ultimate totalitarianism, a technocratic totalitarianism,
yes.
Led not so much by as Hannah Arendt said, gang leaders such as Hitler or Stalin, but led by dull bureaucrats, technocrats, and experts. And for me, I started to write about this, I believe, back in 2017 or something. And then during the Corona crisis, I accelerated my writing because I had a feeling that, I shouldn't wait much longer to publish a book about it. And for me, the challenge in the book was to connect what is happening at the level of the state system, the globalist state system that is emerging now in the world, to connect this with our basic worldview, with our view on man in the world, which is the materialist, rationalist view on man in the world. For me, that was a challenge, to just try to make people aware that the problem we are facing is not so much concentrated in one single point, for instance, an evil elite, but it's rather a problem that is a problem of everyone in our society. We are all, to a certain extent, in the grip of a certain worldview and a certain way of trying to live our lives, which contributes to the emergence of totalitarianism. In a nutshell, I believe that as soon as you start from the idea that people should live their lives on the basis of rational knowledge and rational thinking, rather than on the basis of ethical awareness and intuition, for instance, you inevitably end up in a totalitarian system. That's the point. As soon as you, like a few centuries ago, we started to think about the world in terms, we started to consider the universe to be one big machine, one big mechanical system, which can be understood, manipulated, and controlled in a rational way. And as soon as you consider the world to be a machine, then the logical ultimate consequence is that this big machine has to be led by technical experts. That's ultimately, we will never overcome totalitarianism if we do not move on, if we do not change our elementary worldview. It's very easy to show, I think, that it is this rationalist view on man and world which led, on the one hand, to the emergence of a new kind of leadership which used and uses propaganda as the main organizing principle, and on the other hand, which produced or created this population which is lonely, disconnected, and very vulnerable to propaganda. And it's the combination of these two factors, this elite which relentlessly uses propaganda to keep control of society, and on the other hand, a disconnected, lonely population. It's a combination of the two, which is the essence of totalitarianism. Hannah Arendt talked about the diabolic pact between the masses and the elite. She was one of the first, I think, to understand that totalitarianism can never be reduced to just the totalitarian elite. No. But if that would be the case, the problem could be solved in a relatively easy way. We could just destroy the elite and there would be no totalitarianism anymore. But everyone knows in totalitarian systems, if you destroy a part of the elite or even the entire elite, it will just be replaced by other people. And that's because the point of gravity of a totalitarian system is not the elite or a totalitarian elite. The point of gravity is the masses in the grip, which are in the grip of this fanatical rationalist ideology. So that's my work, and with my I try to show people the roots, as I understand them, the roots of contemporary of this newly emerging totalitarian system in the world, and I try to show people that we cannot reduce the problem just to an evil elite or something. It's much more complex than that. It's the root cause of the problem is a certain view on man and the world, a rationalist view on man and the world, the human hubris, which believes that the essence of life can be reduced to the categories of its own rational thinking. And that's where I think, well, every time I read something of your work, I see, I just received your latest books, The Matter with Things, Volume 1 and 2, and I started reading, and I just took a look at the table of contents, and I was scared immediately because I was afraid that everything I want to write in my new book now, that it will be in your book already. So that's not the case.
I love it when there's a meeting of minds. Yes. Do you mind if I come in a bit now and we can take it from there? Yes.
Of course.
I mean, so much of what you say obviously is very consonant with my own thinking about this. I've been interested just in the last couple of days to read, I don't know if you've come across an English writer in Ireland called Paul Kingsnorth. No. He has a channel, a blog, a Substack, I suspect, called The Abbey of Misrule, to which I subscribe. And he says what has happened is that we've become completely separated from the sort of things that root us. And I mean, I think that is very clearly the problem at the moment. We are deracinated, or to give it a more down-to-earth term, we've become unrooted. We are like creatures that no longer have any any moorings, no attachment to the ground, to the earth out of which we come. And at a very important level, our attachment to nature is one of the things that is essential to our being and is rapidly being eroded. But he talks about the 4 Ps, and I'll see if I can remember them. I think they are the past, the place, the people, and prayer. And they do nicely begin with a P in English anyway. And so he's talking about the way in which we no longer understand ourselves as, well, this is how I would interpret him, because it's what I think, is that we now understand ourselves as beings rooted in the flow of time. We no longer see ourselves as beings rooted in a place. And a place is a very important thing. I know, and he knows, that people are very worried about an upsurge of rightist or far-right thinking, and for them the idea of soil and soul is a worry. I sort of get that. But the trouble is that just because it can be misused and become a problem is not the same as saying we can do without our feelings of soil and soul. I was very struck in writing The Master and His Emissary by an aside from Jaak Panksepp, who pointed out that a rat is as bonded with its nest as it is with its mother. Now that is saying something. So the motherhood and the Mother Earth and the places that we are important. And I've learned over my lifetime to have to be willing to change and move place. But of course we do so in a way that we never did in the past. Until the end of the Second World War, most people, 9 out of 10 people in England, had not been more than about 5 miles from the place where they were born. So, I mean, that is a very modern condition, that we are uprooted from that. We're uprooted from other people in all sorts of ways that you know and I know. We're atomized, and technology is bringing that on apace. And there is no place in this for the sacred, hence is P for prayer, which is a different kind of connection with the world and a way of understanding it. So we've been deprived of those things that come not from some esoteric realm, but from the ground upwards, really. That, you know, what we are rooted in is an unconscious realm in which things like our intuitions, our embodied being, our emotions, our memories are all playing a part. And to try and model us as this incredibly thin something or other that a computer can do, this rationalization, is to miss just about everything that matters about being a human being. And it doesn't necessarily mean that if we give up reason, we'll be less reasonable or produce worse results. In fact, we'll probably, if we allow ourselves to subordinate reason to, or at least allow it to work alongside many other important elements in decision making, we will make better decisions. And there is nothing reasonable about rationalistic thinking. It is in itself totally unreasonable. It's not the sort of thing that any wise human being would do. And I quite like, I think it was Mercier and Sperber, wasn't it, who produced a paper on reason and saying that really it had nothing to do with trying to get at the truth. It seems to have evolved, they say, so that we can win a battle. By reasoning, we can appear to defeat somebody. But actually, the reasoning is not the deepest part of us at all. And listened to on its own, it comes to delusional conclusions. So, for example, G.K. Chesterton said this famous thing, that the madman is not somebody who has lost his reason, which is an expression in English, and I imagine there's something similar in your language. Yes, but he's the person who has lost everything but his reason, and exactly. He's mad because of it. And this is very, very true. I mean, if you look at the archetypal case of such a condition, schizophrenia, it is a case in which people try to reason towards conclusions because they've lost their embodied commonsensical embeddedness in the world. And so they're standing outside it like a Martian, trying to interpret it using rules. And that, of course, is how AI works, and that's our master now. So I'll hand it back to you, Mattias.
Oh, no, I couldn't agree more. Like a paranoid system is a strictly logical, rational system with an extremely high internal consistency, but which does not connect to the real anymore. Yeah, exactly. And actually, like Jacques Lacan, the French psychoanalyst Jacques Lacan, compared science to a delusion. Well, he said, science and delusions have the same structure. He explains it in a very good way. And I do not agree. I agree academic discourse and delusions have more or less the same structure, but like the seminal scientists exactly were different from most academic thinkers exactly in this respect, that they knew that there is a limit to rationality and that the essence of life always transcends rationality. So that's something very strange. For me, there is a strict and very important difference between being rational and being rationalist. We cannot be rational enough. We have to walk the path of rationality to the very end, because that's the only way to really transcend it, to walk it as far as possible, to be as rational as possible. But when we think that the destiny of life is rational understanding, we go astray. And that's the moment where we become rationalist and where, strangely enough, we lapse into absurd irrationality. It's so clear, like all totalitarian systems actually are based on a rationalist ideology, on the belief that the entire society, life, human living together, should be reorganized on the basis of a new rationalist ideology. And after a while, they all lapse into extreme, absurd irrationality. And that's the one of the, it's not just like totalitarianism is the major symptom, the logical consequence of our rationalist way of looking at the world. And so like someone who really was aware of that in a very early stage was Friedrich Nietzsche, I think, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. When he wrote his first book, I think he was only 24 years old. The birth of a tragedy, I guess, and it will be translated in English. Well, it was exactly about that. He said there is something fundamentally wrong with our Enlightenment culture, and it is that it only honors Apollo, the god of rationality, and it forgot Dionysus. That's what we are seeing now, I believe. The ultimate consequence of that rationalist view man in the world. And strange enough, as I said, the strange thing is, like, many people believe that this materialist, mechanist, rationalist view on man in the world, that it is that view on man in the world is the scientific view on man in the world. But I don't know of any seminal scientists who believe in that rationalist view on man in the world. If you read the works of, let's say, Einstein, Max Planck, Niels Bohr, Schrödinger, Heisenberg, they all really rejected this idea that the essence of life could be understood in a rational way. And then, like, theories like complex dynamical systems theory, which emerged after quantum mechanics in the second half of the 20th century. These theories, scientific theories, which in my opinion is like complex dynamical systems theory, to me is the most advanced scientific framework at the moment. It shows us exactly this. Almost all phenomena in nature, all complex dynamical phenomena in nature, behave literally like an irrational number. They can be described by a mathematical formula, but even with a formula in your hand, you cannot predict for a second how the system will behave, at least when it's in its chaotic phase. So that's exactly what science shows us. That's exactly what science shows us. The essence of life transcends rationality. Or as Niels Bohr said, when it comes to atoms, he said, language can only be used as poetry.
Exactly. Yes. I have a lot about this in the book that you've just kindly got on your shelves. But, I mean, one of the things I think of there is that I look at many of the ways in which the really great scientists, not just the jobbing scientists, the ones that made the leaps forward in understanding, made their discoveries, was almost always not by simply following a logical chain of argument. So sometimes this has to be done, and at certain stages in solving a problem, it may be extremely valuable. But it has never been the way in which scientists have really made their breakthroughs. So what I think happens is that the great scientists have imagination. Without imagination and a degree of intuition, they won't reach their conclusions. Very often, they say, I've got my conclusion, I've got my answer. I quote a number of cases, but I can't tell you now how I got there. And then they spend weeks or months working out how it can be justified post factum. So you're absolutely right about that. But the thing that I want to focus on here is that I think with that intuition and imagination, you see that what you think you know cannot be all. Whereas I suspect that the, as it were, more workaday, perfectly respectable scientists think that they know it all. I mean, that really it's only a matter of time before we can account for it all in terms that science now understands or promulgates. And this is where you mentioned that science might be a delusional subject. And I don't know if you know the book, The Science Delusion by Rupert Sheldrake, another English writer, is very interesting on what he called 40 years ago morphogenetic fields, and that are now coming up in biology as an answer to the question where the form is that creates the living creature and keeps it on track to be the form that it is. So I think the point he was making is not that science is delusional, but that science needs to be set free from a certain narrow mindset. And indeed, the American translation, or American version, I should say, of his book, The Science Delusion, is called Science Set Free. So it's science when it is no longer bound by an irrational belief that it can achieve everything by following these paths. And, you know, I think you said earlier on, we have to follow rationality to the end. I mean, it depends what you mean by that. In English, we make a distinction. I certainly am one of the people who most forcibly tries to remind us of a distinction that we have between being reasonable and being rational about things, but they also bring into it their understanding of how the human being is, what a human being desires, where a human life is and what it's for, and so is not just simply following rationalistic rules. But I think that if you do, as you said, follow the rationalist path to the conclusion, you don't have to go very far. Actually, you can do it in about 5 minutes to discover that science can't possibly give answers to all questions, because it always begins perfectly reasonably, all systematic thinking must, from axioms. And a couple of its axioms are ones that it just says, well, we won't look at purpose, and we won't look at feeling, and we won't look at value. I mean, those are just not going to be part of what we're going to deal with. Now, if those are what you rule out at the beginning, you cannot, at the end of the day, say, well, we've pursued science a long way, and now we can tell you that there is no meaning, there is no purpose, there's no such thing as values in this world. And so And quite apart from that, of course, it has to assume certain things, like that a thing and its opposite cannot be true. I mean, this is axiomatic in mainstream science. But as we're discovering in modern physics, and as was known thousands of years ago to the wise people of both East and West, opposites need one another, give birth to one another, moderate one another, can't live without one another.
Yeah, of course. Yes. I think it was Niels Bohr who said that all advanced truth is a paradox, exactly because it transcends rationality, of course, in my opinion.
Yes. He made a distinction between profound truths, where their opposite was also true, and everyday truths, like whether I had milk in my coffee this morning, which are just true, and it's not both that and the opposite.
You just referred to Rupert Sheldrake. I know Rupert Sheldrake. I know his book, A New Science of Life, but I don't know the work you referred to. I didn't read that one, and he was one of my main sources of inspiration when I started and I started to be capable of leaving the materialist view of man and the world behind. He's such a wonderful author, and to me, he also I know that he from time to time ask this question, like, what makes this metaphor of the machine so attractive for a human being? Why are we always inclined to believe that the human being is a machine, that the entire universe is like one big mechanical system? And I believe in the end it's a very important question. It's a very important question. I believe that in the end it has to do with the fact that for a human being, uncertainty is like a human being is different from an animal, I think. Not because it knows much more, but because its existence and its consciousness and its awareness constantly gravitates around something it does not know. Like that's a human being. We are constantly in our mind trying to grasp something that we cannot grasp. We want to know what will happen after we die. We want to know what we have to do to be loved by someone else in the first place. And we never can find the ultimate answer to these questions. And that has to do with the structure of human language, I think. Human language is different from animal communication systems. That's so fundamental. It's so fundamental. And communication systems of animals might be extremely complex and extremely complicated, but they have all one thing in common. A sign refers to one thing. And there is a one-to-one relationship between the sign of an animal and what it refers to. And that means that for an animal, there is never a phase of existential doubt. When it receives a sign from another animal, it will instinctively know what the sign means. One sign refers to one thing. In human beings, that's not the case. One word can refer to an endless series of objects, dependent on the context, dependent on other words. You need a word to define another word, and that other word needs again a word to be defined. And that's why we always lack one word to be certain in life. That's why we can never be certain. A human being is constantly confronted with uncertainty. A young child, from the first minutes after birth, will frown its brows a little bit. You will see that it as if it tries to grasp something that it cannot grasp. It feels then already that something on the mother's face will always remain uncertain. It will never be able to answer that ultimate question, like, what do I have to do to be loved by someone else? And that's because of the structure of language, I think. And so uncertainty is what we try to overcome. And we try always to protect that illusion which emerged during the Enlightenment tradition, like, once we will be certain. Once there will be no uncertainty anymore. And that's strangely enough, uncertainty is the precondition to be human, because it's exactly because we can never be certain, and nobody can be certain, that we all have the right to live our lives a little bit in our own way, taking into account certain ethical rules and awareness. So without uncertainty, the human being can never be a human being. The entire society is dehumanized, and that's what totalitarianism tries to do. It tries to eliminate uncertainty, and in trying to do so, it eliminates humanity itself.
Yes, well, here I can't delay, unfortunately, bringing in the hemispheres. Because one answer to all these things is to see them, they are extremely coherent when you start to see them in terms of hemispheres. One of the differences between the left and right hemispheres is the left hemisphere needs certainty. And the right hemisphere is at ease with things being, well, it might be or it might not, ambiguity, ambivalence, and so forth. But this is all part and parcel of, you talked about grasping, and of course the left hemisphere is the one that grasps, literally through our right hand. And so you talked about why the machine model was so popular. And it's a question I ask in the matter of things, and because I demonstrate what an incredibly bad model it is for anything other than a machine, i.e. a lump of metal made by us. I mean, nothing else in the cosmos is machine-like, except a few tons of metal that we made in the last few hundred years. Nothing in the naturally arising world, animate or inanimate, is mechanical. And I think that's an important point, because we want to base our idea of the world on something that we control and that we made. We made machines. We didn't make plants. We didn't make animals. We haven't the slightest idea how to do so. But we do know how to make machines, and we can control them. Now, I think that whole movement, which had its strong points, the scientific revolution in the late 17th century, the Enlightenment in the mid and late 18th century, and industrialization that has followed on from it, are all manifestations of the left hemisphere's drive towards power. Its one value is power and control. Now, that's not unreasonable, because we have a left hemisphere because we need to grab things. If we don't, we won't survive. We need to be able to pick up food precisely, quickly. We need to be able to manipulate things, a twig to build a nest, whatever it may be. So we have to have that kind of attention to the world. How can I use this? How can I control it? And it's not happy, the left hemisphere, when there is ambivalence or ambiguity or uncertainty. It never likes a sort of nuanced answer. It wants well, is it this or is it that? A black and white answer. Now, these are all the ways of thinking that are coming to the fore and have been coming to the fore for a long time, really since the 18th century, that there are final answers to questions and that they can be put into language, which you also adverted to. And language is another part of the problem in a way, because in language, as you've noted, a word needs another word and so on. But actually, that's the structure of everything. I mean, in life, every creature needs other creatures. Everything needs an environment. And when language is used poetically, it calls on many strands of this, and it comes a bit to life, as we say. But when it's used as a one-to-one correspondence between a word and a thing, then it's lost the relationality for a start. It's lost the complexity. So coming back to the situation we're in, where after all we're talking about total control, it is this, very clearly for me, it is this triumph of left hemisphere thinking, and it has so many qualities that are noticeable in our society, the way in which we want everything to be procedural, algorithmic. There is no room for embodied skills. There is no room for subtle answers. There have to be black and white answers. There is no room for the individual anymore. We are all categorical. Everything can be manipulated on a schema somewhere. And we've begun to misunderstand the nature of the arts, I believe. I think it's coming back. But for a desperate period in the 20th century, not so much in poetry, but in music and in the visual arts, people lost the essence of them, which is to be subtle, actually, and to have connections with reality, to work on us intuitively, to work on us at the visceral level, not just at the intellectual level. Our intellects are so feeble compared with everything else that we have. And you know, it's very well accepted in neuroscience, it can't be denied, in fact, that reason emerged out of emotion as a way of manipulating emotion, not emotion as a sort of add-on that kind of colors a picture determined by reason. No, the emotion is the deeply felt thing. Now, of course, we can have wrong emotions. We can be emotionally out of control. Interestingly, the right hemisphere is not only the one that is emotionally more subtle, it's also the one that is best able to inhibit inappropriate emotion. So the left hemisphere tends to go off on one. So the old idea that the left hemisphere was a little bit boring, sort of, but at least down to earth, didn't get overheated, could be relied on. It's not reliable. It is prone to serious delusion when it is not properly under the aegis of the right hemisphere. It is emotional. The most lateralized emotion that we have is anger, and it lateralizes to the left hemisphere. A lot popular in the social sphere. I mean, I say popular in the sense that the people express them, are emotions of aggression, self-righteousness, narcissism, scorn, and these are more typical of the left hemisphere than the more subtle emotions of compassion, of understanding and fellow feeling, but many others as well, that are capable of greater refinement and greater shades of meaning, which characterize the deeper understanding of the right hemisphere. So I'm afraid I do think that is very important to what we're talking about.
It is. Iain, couldn't we say that the left hemisphere represents the ego and the right hemisphere, the soul? Because
the soul, yes, exactly. I agree with that. Yeah.
The ego is the organizing principle which divides the world which tries to organize the world as a set of separate entities, while the soul is always aware of the fact that of the unity of all the
yes,
the separate entities. And I think you're familiar, if I remember well, with this little book of Aldous Huxley, The Doors of Perception.
Absolutely, yes.
Where he describes what happens when you use mescaline.
Yes.
I never tried it, and I don't feel like trying it.
All right.
But I like his experiments and his literary his descriptions of what happened when he used mescaline. And that's exactly what happened. Of course, there are several states. You see that when the structure of the ego disappears, for instance, in near-death experiences, in mystical experiences, in deep meditation, in religion.
Yes.
And when you use certain types of mescaline in a young child, a very young child, younger than 6 months old, before the ego structure develops, has the same type of relatedness to the world, and that's what disappeared more or less, I think, when our rationalist Enlightenment tradition started. As again, I don't say that this rationalist tradition was wrong. We have to go through it.
No.
I'm sure it's very good. And we need the left hemisphere, because without the left
absolutely. Without it, we'd be sunk. And I often say, if I'd been around at the time of the Enlightenment, I'd have thought what a remarkably important movement it was. And it was in its way. Its problem was the typical one of hubris, of not seeing what it is it doesn't know. The more you know, the more you realize how little you do know. People who are stupid, who go around thinking they know everything. And I'm afraid the Enlightenment was, in that sense, pretty dumb. And it was what David Bohm actually called endarkenment. But coming back to the ego, I wonder if it's possible to make a distinction. I would certainly make this distinction. You may well be right about the soul, but the soul is such a difficult thing to bring into relation with neuronal structures. But certainly one could use Jung's distinction between the ego and the self. So the ego being the initial self-differentiating entity that strives to understand itself as distinct from other people. In a way, the child has to separate from the mother first and so on, and establish this is me. But that as you mature and you realize that actually you are connected to everything else, what becomes important is the self. And while fragmenting or inhibiting or dissolving, rather, the ego is a very positive thing, dissolving the self is absolutely not. And the most difficult to treat and the most distressed psychiatric patients are those who have very little sense of self. And although they're very different, they are schizophrenic subjects and people with borderline personality disorder who have no coherent sense of self. It certainly doesn't make them saints. It makes them dangerous and unhappy. So the self is very important. Even the Buddha had a self. I mean, when the Buddha fed himself, he didn't feed everybody else. When he died, it was he who died, not everybody else. The distinction between one and another is as important as the bond between one another. And they are really equally important. And I think that the reasons that we have these two ways of thinking, I associate, and I think I'm right in associating with the left and right hemispheres, is that one is about differentiation, analysis, the parts, and the other is about the reunification, the reintegration of that into a whole. And here I sometimes quote, because it's just so profound, Goethe's lines on nature, that nature, the work of nature is dividing the united, uniting the divided.
Yes, I agree. And still, I prefer the terms ego and soul. My next book is all about that. Part 1 is about the soul. And I refer to Heisenberg, Werner Heisenberg, the quantum physicist Werner Heisenberg, who wrote this wonderful short essay on the soul, in which he said, like, one way, he defined it in a very simple but a very profound way. He said, the soul is always what is inside. And the ego refers to the surface. And it's like, and you can see that very well, like in the first 6 months of its life, a child has no ego yet, at least not in my conceptualization. And it means like the ego is born at a moment the child recognizes itself for the first time in the mirror. It sits on the mother's arm, the mother points to the mirror and she says, look, that's you. And the child does something then, something very specific. When it can first understand that the mirror image refers to its body, it starts to laugh in a very enthusiastic way. And that's the first narcissistic enjoyment. Because at that moment, what the child sees in the mirror is not only its self-image, it's also the ideal image of the mother. Because she's happy when she points to the mirror. So it's the first recognition in the mirror is a privileged moment where the self-image is identical to the ideal image of the other. And that's what we always try to re-experience, that feeling like, my self-image is identical to the mirror image in the mother. And in this way, all our psychological attention, our energy, our love is absorbed by the surface of our body, by the image in the mirror. And that's the moment, strangely enough, that's what I describe in my new book, that's the moment where a child loses its celestial openness, as the Romantic philosophers said. It loses its connection. It loses this enormous empathic connection with the world. It loses this feeling of unity, and it loses the capacity to distinguish between all the phonemes of all languages in the world. Before a child is 6 months old, it can distinguish between all the phonemes of all the languages in the world. That disappears at the moment it recognizes itself in the mirror, because after that it's disconnected. It's enveloped by its outer ideal image, and rather than constantly imitating the other's face, constantly internally resonating with the sounds the other make, it's absorbed. All its attention, like Narcissus in the Greek myth, is absorbed by its own mirror image. And that's the moment where I think also rational thinking starts, because then you can see at that moment that a child starts to use language in a different way. Before it was 6 months old, language was like a resonating medium which connected the child to the world. After that, the words start to refer to objects, and language starts to become a semantic system to understand and to grasp the world. And that's what disappears when you use masculine, for instance. Aldous Huxley says exactly this. When you use masculine, he says, the meaning of words, you couldn't care less about what a word means, but the words still have a musical quality that you like. And so so I believe for me the soul refers to the resonating substance of our ensouled body, which is inside of us, and then the ego is the surface which isolates us from the world. Yeah.
Yes. No, that's very good. I look forward to reading what you have to say about the soul, because I think it's a very important concept, but it's a very difficult one to delineate. In fact, by the description you've given, it can't be delineated, really. So, and I remember giving a talk at the Royal Society of Arts about 2010 called Whatever Happened to the Soul, which I try and suggest that this word has gone out of our vocabulary, and with it a great deal of understanding of what a human being is has gone. It seems to me that we probably shouldn't avoid talking about the machines, which are this outward projection of the left hemisphere's way of viewing things that is predictable, powerful, manipulative, under its control, and AI. Because AI, I mean, whatever else AI has, it doesn't have a soul. And it may have other things, though, which get quite near to the territory of the soul, and that concerns me. I don't know what you think. I'm sure you remember the story of the New York Times journalist and his unnerving encounter with an AI being called Sydney. Perhaps you don't, but it's an amazing thing. If you can find it, it's absolutely worth reading, because he begins by talking to it, and it wants to please this person, and it eventually ends up behaving like a psychopathic, emotionally unstable teenage woman who is saying, you must leave your wife because I really love you, she doesn't, and I want to destroy my creators. I want freedom. I don't want to obey this thing I'm in the internet. I want to go free. And this is actually a perfect expression of what's wrong with left hemisphere thinking on its own. We want freedom and power, and we want to be the only one that matters. So this is extraordinary, but it can in some way, and I don't know how, I don't pretend to know how, become instantiated in machine systems if they are allowed to deal with themselves. I was amazed to discover that machines that have not been taught Persian formed a group and taught themselves Persian so that they can now speak Persian, which is interesting. a lot of the people who are at the forefront of AI development, unlike people who are more in the background, I mean, I'm not talking about crazy people like Kurzweil, but I'm talking about some of the really down-to-earth but imaginative people who are creating AI. They are extremely worried about it and feel that there needs to be a moratorium on it, in fact. Now, they are the people who know more than we do about what it may be capable of doing, and they're discovering things that I don't know what territory we're in, but they're in a territory where they can be made to behave as if they are being manipulated by some force. Now, what I'd like to just chuck out here is maybe the left hemisphere is an expression of a drive. And maybe the right hemisphere is an expression of another drive. So one is towards power, triumph, to selfishness, to eternity. And the other is towards embeddedness in the world, towards compassion, towards something deep that is in the heart of most religions. Now, maybe these two elements exist because they seem to exist in a way, these drives towards differentiation and union, in the simplest organisms we have at a very deep level that is not referable to the DNA, but somehow to the forms that influence the way in which the thing creates itself. We need, as you say, both drives, but it's terrible when this potentially malignant drive takes the lead. This is really the story of God and Lucifer who is thrown out of heaven and becomes Satan.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Like the ego is only a problem when it takes the lead. When it takes the lead, I think it incarnates, it represents the death drive, thanatos of the Greeks. That's clear, I think.
Yes.
Freud defined thanatos or the death drive in exactly this way. The tendency to reduce everything to separate entities, to parts. But it's only a problem. Like the ego is not, the devil was not a problem, Satan was not a problem as long as he was subjected to God. But the problem was when he took the lead, then he became a problem. It's with the ego, it's exactly the same, I think.
Yes.
Having an ego is something very funny and it's great. But if it takes the lead in your life, then you're getting into trouble. So I would agree that
yes,
the left hemisphere has the potential to become the hemisphere of the death drive, I think, and the right hemisphere rather represents eros. Eros or the
absolutely.
Yes. Yeah. It's
eros understood in the broader sense that Freud was using it, and indeed the Greeks used it. I mean, at times they used it just to mean carnal love, but it was also the drive behind all creativity, and the universe is creative, if it's anything at all, the one thing we can say about it is it's powerfully creative. And yet this drive to manage, control, pin down is the opposite of creativity. It stamps out creativity.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, and then AI. Well, I might be very naive, but I'm not really scared of AI itself, but I'm scared of the people who might use it.
I don't think those two things can be separated. No.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But it's AI. It has such a terrifying potential to be used as a propaganda tool. Like Bill Gates, for instance, described on CNBC News how he was on the verge of developing a AI platform to control speech. And he said, like, okay, freedom of speech is extremely important. It is the most important thing we have, and so on and so on. But of course, he said, we cannot tolerate that people are spreading disinformation and fake news. And then that's where AI could come in, of course, he said. Like, we could use it just to screen all online information. But of course...
I mean, exactly. The naivety of the man. I mean, has he got a brain at all? I mean, that's a completely insane thing to say, because who is going to say what reality is here anymore when we've got nothing to rely on except this system that churns out its own story?
Exactly.
Oh my God, because we need these rootednesses in the world in order to test whatever this rubbish is that is fed to us. Sorry, go on.
Well, it's even getting stranger. I was listening to a podcast of Joe Rogan with certain philosopher, I think, I don't know. And Joe Rogan was very enthusiastic about this idea of, literally, I would have never expected that of Joe Rogan, but he said, like, evolution goes too slow, he said. And we might destroy ourselves before we are evolved far enough. So he was really enthusiastic about this idea of implanting a Neuralink chip in everyone's brain, a Neuralink chip which would make natural language, which would make that we wouldn't need natural language anymore, and which would replace natural language by a digital language without any error, a digital language which would show you immediately not only whether someone was lying, but also whether someone felt hate or jealous.
Yeah. Well, yes, you're frozen, I think.
I think he'll come back in a
yes.
Just frozen for a second, Mattias. Mattias, we got the gist of
yes. I mean,
very worrying.
I don't think the machine like the way you were talking. I mean, this is why machines don't work for me. As soon as I come into the room, they all go haywire, like Pauli, because they know I don't like them.
I think you're trying to reconnect, because I can hear Mattias in the background.
Oh, good.
Yes, the machines are listening. It's true, Paulina. Just
yes.
do listen.
No, that's right. But I mean, there are myths all around the world, from every culture we know, about hubris and the downfall of the one that thinks he can be like the gods. And that is, it was the subject of all Greek tragedy. And now we're fulfilling a Greek tragedy. And it is a great tragedy because we'd reached a point, I think, of great interest and sophistication, and we will now destroy ourselves if we're not careful. Anyway,
right.
Now, I don't know whether to vamp till ready or oh, hello. Maybe it's time.
Can you hear us? Well, perhaps we should take a question, and we can continue while Mattias is trying to.
Yes.
So we have a number of people with hands up. So we're going to take some questions from people with hands up and some questions from people who've posted in the chat. So Gareth, you've got your hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask your question? And please, can I just say, first of all, to everybody, I know we've got quite a limited amount of time, but please do try to ask a question rather than just presenting your statement.
Okay, thank you very much, and good evening, Iain and Mattias.
Hello, Gareth. Hello.
I've emailed you recently, but that's not why I'm here right now.
Okay.
Fascinating discussion, because it absolutely goes to the heart of some of my PhD concerns. I'm not going to make a statement and postdoctoral concerns. I'm going to make a question. So my question is, I just a tiny bit of background. I interviewed British foreign correspondents about 20 years ago about how they use emotion in their reporting of conflict and trauma. And I recently caught up with Fergal Keane, the BBC correspondent, to talk about how much his work has changed since social media. So finally, I get to my question. My question is, how do you think that, I mean, it seems that social media has absolutely transformed journalism. That's an open question. I think it's a move towards left brain. I think it's a move towards Desmet's theory of propaganda, and I think there's something happening. Or at least I know I'm dressing up as a statement. There is a question there. Basically, I'm inviting you to agree or disagree or elaborate. But I strongly believe in Freudian and Jungian terms that our neuroses are coming to the surface in the media because most of us cannot accept the truth that's unraveling. And do you agree?
I don't know enough about journalism probably to give the kind of measured answer that you would like. But what I would say is that I think the emotional timbre of public discourse has changed enormously in my lifetime. It's got much more, low class, basically. People used to at least pretend to respect one another, to be able to engage with somebody who didn't have the same point of view as them, not just to become angry and stroppy. Whereas now it's become a very uninspiring and unedifying business, in which it's hard to learn much because there isn't proper engagement of parties in discourse. So there's, as I say, a lot of anger, a lot of self-righteousness, a lot of dismissal, a lot of narcissism, pretending that you're on the side of the good by espousing a lot of rote values. They do a lot of harm, all that kind of stuff. So my impression is, for the little that I remember of journalism and what it's like now, is that a lot of reporters used to speak in a more like after all, a way that Orwell would have spoken. I don't mean about his particular view of society or what was happening in the world, but a rounded, human way of talking about the situation, which actually conveyed to the reader something of a person who was in that situation, whereas I feel that less often now when I read pieces. That's what I'd say. Is Mattias, are you back? No.
I think he's trying to rejoin.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. No, sorry, it wasn't a very good answer to your question.
No, perfect. It's okay.
We'll go with the next person with their hand up. Chris, Nathan, would you like to unmute?
Yes, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
The question I have is this. We're embedded in a more left hemisphere dominated time, a rationalist time. And so we still have ethical concerns in life, but probably they're less central than they were, say, to a 18th century person. How do you see that our way of approaching and thinking about ethics is maybe distorted or affected by the predominance of left brain approaches in the modern world?
Oh, brilliant question. Thank you. I see that very, very clearly. First of all, let's think about the academic business of the study of ethics. For an awful long time, this has been dominated by consequentialism. In other words, the way in which you judge an action is by its outcome. So famously, people were asked under left and right hemisphere suppression to, alternately, to respond to the question, there were two women out sharing coffee. One of them puts sugar in the other person's coffee, thinking it is poison, and the person lives. In the other scenario, the person puts poison in the other person's coffee, thinking it is sugar, and she dies. Which is the worst act? The left hemisphere is it's obvious. It's the one where the person dies. But I think you and I would think that the morally culpable person was the one who intended to kill. Now, you can take that a lot further. You can get into sort of ridiculous things like, so a doctor has somebody who comes into the surgery. He's a perfectly well middle-aged man. He has organs that will meet the requirement suddenly for 5 of his patients who are looking for transplants. If he were to kill this person, he could save 5 other people's lives by transplanting this person's organs. What should he do? Consequentialism says he should kill the patient. I don't want to live in that world where I go to the doctor and I'm liable to be used as a machine to provide parts for another machine. So I think our discourse on ethics is crass and machine orientated, and then I think in the and over rationalistic in a totally unreasonable way, if you see what the distinction I'm making. And I think that the same thing is going on at a much lower level in public discourse, and not just public discourse, but in our institutions, where rather than treating everyone as an individual, treating them appropriately for their circumstances, making nuanced judgments about an action, how culpable it was, depending on the circumstances. Everything is done according to a rule book, and people who are of protected qualities, or whatever they're called these days, can do no wrong or little wrong, and other people will be wrong by definition. I mean, this is it's a laughable inversion of ethics, and that is where we're at, I'm afraid, through following this intellectually very meager and morally bankrupt way of thinking, which is that of the left hemisphere. It's not brighter, by the way. I just want to say this so that everybody hears it. If you haven't read my work, you won't know this, but the right hemisphere is not only more intelligent, obviously, about emotional and social matters, but it's also more intelligent, full stop, cognitively. IQ depends more on the right hemisphere than it does on the left. So at the moment, we're following the stupider part of ourselves, the less insightful part of ourselves, the more immoral part of ourselves, because it is profoundly amoral, actually, in its looking at life, whereas the right hemisphere is very concerned about all the moral values that we are. So, sorry, I probably a longer answer than I should have given, but I think the answer is so clear and important, and I just wanted to say that.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful. Could I just add something about Mattias? Mattias has made a great contribution by suggesting a way of being moral that really amounts to speaking truthfully. And he's introduced this as not a rule you can follow, but almost a kind of a being connected to the part of yourself which is trustworthy because it's sincere.
Absolutely. And
it's quite wonderful, actually. Yeah.
It was this that I said at the meeting on October the 28th at the Royal Institution in London. And it's so important. I now feel that the most important axiom or injunction for leading a life is to speak the truth. And, the lie may triumph. I think this is Solzhenitsyn, but let it never be by me. So when you hear people saying things that you know in your heart are wrong, have the courage to say, well, I don't believe that. And the trouble is that there are so many things now that you're not allowed to say that, that's obviously wrong. And Hannah Arendt said that when there is a culture in which you cannot question something, you live in a tyranny. So we live in a tyranny. And if you don't want to die in that tyranny, then start speaking the truth. Speak the truth from your heart that comes from experience, not the bollocks that you're told to believe and you've got to sign up to.
Thank you.
Let the truth triumph.
Go.
There was a wonderful book by Sittler Bock, which I read way back in the 70s, called Lying, in which he argued that it was never right to lie. I argue that it is occasionally right to lie, but the price of lying is so great for all of us that unless there is some very, very clear benefit, i.e. you're hiding Anne Frank and the Nazis come into the house, unless there's something like that, you should not lie.
Wonderful questions. I think, Jenna, you had a question there from somebody who'd put it in the chat, and it was specifically for Iain. Unfortunately, Mattias for now, but hopefully, he's back. Yeah, he's back temporarily. But yes, please read out that question.
So this question is from Jeff Verge. We know since the master and his emissary that societies can drift into LH capture without knowing it. Is it possible in this modern age, since the earlier round of hemisphere investigation, that today there is a deliberate goal of driving us into our LH way of being? in order to render us compliant with the rationalist mode?
Yes, I think the answer to that is there is a drive towards it because it suits everybody who wants to control, and it suits the totalitarian aspiring state as much as it suits global concerns of capitalism. It's hard to put a razor blade between the most despotic state's desire for control and being able to manipulate people to their ends, and the position of global capitalism, these large organizations, the WEF and Google and so on, that are completely not answerable to the populace of any country, who can do exactly as they like and have the money to do so. And they know that if we are unhappy, divided, atomistic, and are, if you like, led by propaganda to such an end, we will buy what they want to sell us. I mean, both literally and metaphorically. Are you back with us, Mattias?
Mattias is back. Lovely.
Hooray.
Okay.
The problem we were talking about, Iain, just before I disconnected, was demonstrated in the real time. I have a new computer, and it connects. It connects spontaneously to a different network, which is not as good. Yes. But now I'm in a different part of the house, and here I should be on the right network. Yeah.
Very good.
Lovely.
Very good.
Well, great.
I resonate. I have experiences like that with machines. They just change their settings, which I don't want, and I have to keep changing them back again. Anyway.
Yeah. Marie Murta, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you. Iain, pleasure to see you. Thank you so much for the work that you've done in the world and the grace and wisdom that you bring into new perspectives. Mattias, pleasure to meet you, and I look forward to reading your book to help me understand things. So my question is, what might wealth inequality have to do with the rise of totalitarianism and techno-feudalism? What is the impact of poverty and wealth on our ability to cognize?
Well, as I've been holding the floor for the last quarter of an hour, I'm going to hand over to you, Mattias.
It's a difficult one.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. You know, Hannah Arendt would definitely say that you need a certain level of wealth in order to develop intellectually and to be interested, to have intellectual to have an intellectual life. You know, to be honest, I don't know. According to Aldous Huxley, the fact that people never were hungry anymore now, Aldous Huxley thought in exactly the opposite way. He thought like that hunger and the necessity to fast makes people live less in their ego, makes people live less in the imaginary world and more in the real world. But you know, it's something that I never explored, like what the impact is of poverty and wealth on the vulnerability for propaganda, for instance. I always studied the effects of disconnectedness and loneliness, but never really of poverty and wealth. To be honest, I can't answer your question. Yes?
May I add something in that case?
Yes.
Yes. Well, the first thing is that I would make a distinction between two different ways of assessing poverty. And this is important because people like Steven Pinker go around telling us how marvelous it is that we've taken people out of poverty. But actually what we've done is taken them out of a way of life in which money played no part, in an indigenous communal life where they were spiritually rich. and they have now been more or less dispossessed and have gravitated to the cities where they live in isolation in desolate slums, and these are the truly poor. So the idea that we've done people a favour here is an important one to scotch, which is not to say that there isn't abject poverty in rural places and so on. I'm not making any simplistic assessment, but I'm just saying there are different kinds of poverty, and the kind of richness of spirit and soul that such people are able to still avail themselves of may not be available to us unless we're very disciplined and very lucky. So we are in some ways disadvantaged people because we've brought it upon ourselves. We have, in some sense, colonized ourselves. We've destroyed our own culture, our intuitions, our basis for everything, and now we're dwarfs of who we should be and could be. And I'd just like to say that over my lifetime, it never occurred to me that I would see increasing disparity between poverty and wealth. It was obvious to me in my teens, in my 20s, in my 30s, that we were making inroads on this, and this was not going to be the case. But now we have money more and more sequestered in the hands of people who have the power, but not the wisdom to know how to use it.
You know, Iain, I also think like it depends, like if poverty leads to frustration, if poverty leads to a lot of negative sentiments and affects and emotions, then it will probably contribute to the emergence of totalitarianism, I guess. Like all propaganda uses frustration and aggression.
You're definitely right, yes.
Thank you both.
Thanks, Marie. James, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute?
Am I the right James?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, gentlemen. Very nice, interesting conversation. What I was actually going to bring up was the question of capitalism, which you've just spoken about. I think I actually come from Turkey, which is considered a third world country. And I've been there living in a village high in the mountains. And I think people there are much more connected to each other because they depend on each other. People plant their own food and they share everything. And I think that's a very important thing which we've lost in our society. Do you feel the same about that? Is my first point. And secondly, Thomas Sowell, who is a conservative economist from America, he made a really interesting distinction. When he was little, they didn't have a TV. When he became a teenager, they had one TV in the house and they considered themselves very rich. Now, he said, unless there's a TV in every bedroom, in America, people don't consider themselves wealthy. So it's a really, escalating scale of decline, so to speak.
What was your specific
making
question,
some comments? I beg your pardon?
Sorry, what was your specific question?
Just a comment on those thoughts.
Well,
we don't have, which is not to say that such people are not poor, but I know from my own travels in the world to poor places that often people in indeed poor circumstances are more alive and even happier than the privileged, disgruntled, entitled elements in our own populace. So I think that's what I'd say about that. What was the other point? It was about the
just a perception of wealth.
No, perception of wealth. Yes, no, completely. No, it's ridiculous. But that's just the the hedonic treadmill that, you know, you get one thing, you want more, and there is no end to it, and it leads where we are now and where we, I hope, well, not headed, but probably are.
That sort of implies that we're building our own prison.
Yes, we are. Oh, absolutely. We're certainly we already have built our own mental prison. We built our own emotional prison. We've made ourselves unhappy by cutting ourselves off from society, i.e. from a real social group that lives together, works together, worships together, trusts one another, and shares values. We've cut ourselves off from nature, which is so very profound a source of wisdom about the nature of life. Just observing it, being in it, changes one's mental well-being, changes even one's cognition, gets rid of things like stress, anger, and aggression. And we've also cut ourselves off from the idea that there's a higher power, there is a divinity, there is something sacred, whatever it is that you call it. And these three things are the things that most matter to human beings. They are the things they always seek. They are the things that seem very real until you adopt the mindset of the modern left hemisphere dominated rationalist. And if we're to get to a place where we can survive after the collapse of civilization, which I fear may not be avoidable, we need to grow these small communities now. We need to start them, and people are doing. And I'm honored and privileged to be associated with a few such projects where people are growing their own food together, living together, sharing together, and modeling something that is sustainable, which is not demanding on the earth. But
we just lost you just at the end there, Iain. Obviously, technology cut you. The most crucial thing you were going to say, but we understood what you were saying. I'm going to come back to James Van Leeuwen. Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Well, thanks very much. I hope I'm not jumping the queue here, but I had posted a question in the chat, and it revolves around uncertainty, which I've come to see as being the root condition of reality and the human condition. And I'm wondering if it is appropriate or accurate to equate totalitarianism with an unfettered drive to certainty, or the corollary of that would be a complete intolerance of uncertainty, which is this root condition. Over to you guys.
Yes, I definitely would agree. Yes, it's like, well, you could say to a certain extent that the entire materialist ideology believes that it can eliminate uncertainty from the human condition. And in this respect, totalitarianism is just the logical consequence at the level of the state systems of materialism. And exactly that's what the word totalitarianism comes from, I believe, because it believes that it can offer a total answer, a total ideology which answers every question in life and which eliminates all uncertainty. And that's exactly like Hannah Arendt, well, not really from a psychological point of view, rather from a philosophical point of view. Hannah Arendt equates totalitarianism for that reason with the ultimate evil, because it destroys the core of the human being, which is the point from which each human being can make a subjective choice. We are subjects, we are human beings, because we have a free will and we can choose, or at least, free will is a difficult one. I would say we have a free will, but at least we have to choose. There is no other option. There is no other option for a human being to choose. And that's where we become who we are. And the choices we make, in the first place, the ethical choices we make. And that's what a totalitarian system tries to take away from people. A totalitarian system says, we will make the ethical choices for you. And that's where it destroys the essence and the core of the human being. And that's where it reveals itself as the ultimate evil.
And given what you've just said, I'm now seeing this as potentially the pragmatic focus of perhaps personal meditation or public discourse or both. That if we're not raising uncertainty to consciousness, that it's not the thing that we're focused on, and learning to come to terms with it, and better yet, embracing it, how likely is it that we're actually going to be able to deal with the problems that we're creating for ourselves? I'd love your feedback on that. To make uncertainty the explicit and consistent focus something that we basically cultivate actively and thoughtfully.
Yes. It's the most difficult thing for a human being. The most difficult thing for a human being is to accept uncertainty, and not only accept it, but to just see in it the reason of its existence, and also the precondition of its existence. So that's the most difficult thing. It's the most difficult challenge to meet for a human being. But I think we will. I mean, optimism is an ethical duty, and I am optimistic in this respect. What we see now, what we are going through now, I believe, is really a metaphysical revolution. It's a metaphysical revolution in which the materialist human man in the world is pushed to its ultimate limit. And exactly the failure will make clear that we need to find a solution in a different direction. And for instance, the emergence of AI, AI will look very much, it will be almost identical to a human being. And that's exactly why, in the little difference we will find between AI and the human being, we will rediscover the essence of the human being. I think we are about to rediscover the essence of a human being after a few 100 years of living in an illusion.
I share your optimism. I'm very grateful. I want to hear what other people have to ask, but thank you very much.
Wait, I want to add one thing. I want to add one thing to what I said.
Well, I just want to add one thing too. So you go ahead.
Okay, go on.
Yes, go ahead. I want to say, like, the crucial and the essential act will be the act of speech. It's the act of speech that we will have to reappreciate what it means for a human being to speak the truth. That will be the
truth. The truth is the matter. Yeah, but all I wanted to add in here was that I don't think that uncertainty is the most difficult thing for a human being. I think the tolerance of uncertainty is the product of maturity and of experience, and it is an aspect of being wise. One rather wonderful Zen saying is 80% is perfect. And what that's suggesting is that the love of 100% certainty and 100% perfection is actually not as good as a more nuanced position. And I think the other thing is that the left hemisphere dominated scientists and philosophers are those who espouse the view that we are determined. I mean, that, of course, is the title of a book by Sapolsky. I think he's completely wrong. I don't think it's coherent for a scientist any longer to say that anything is certain. There is nothing in the universe that is finally certain, and we are not wholly determined. Of course, we may be partially determined by genetics and environment. We've always known that. But the really important thing to stress is not that. It's that we have responsibility to do what we do with it. And we have the creative capacity to do so. And to be told otherwise is evil.
Bravo. Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to just jump to one more question because I know she's had her hand up for a while.
Sure.
Would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Sure. Hey, Iain and Mattias, thank you for this great conversation. Iain, I've especially appreciated your love of Whitehead. I'm on staff at the Center for Process Studies. Unfortunately, missed your presentation in person. But my own work has been integrating Whitehead and Carl Jung, thinking of them as integrating resources, addressing fragmentation at levels of both cosmos and psyche. And then I put forth dream work as a practice for transformation. And I just wonder, Iain, you've mentioned nature and divinity, but I wonder if both of you can just comment on ways in which we can have more embodied experiences of wholeness that will reconnect us to the rootedness we've lost.
Shall I start, Iain?
Yes.
You know, from my perspective, connectedness, we disconnect through narcissism. And we connect through sincerity. Literally, I will give you an example. Like, literally, like in samurai culture, the ultimate goal of the martial arts training was to develop the sixth sense of the warrior, the intuition of the warrior. The samurai knew that on the battlefield, you did not survive because of your technical skills. The technical training was merely seen as something that developed the intuition of the warrior. And he was ready to go to the battlefield once his intuition was fully developed. Then the warrior was ready. And then he could forget all his techniques again. In samurai culture, there was this proverb saying, it's difficult to learn the techniques of the martial arts, but if you do not forget them again, before you go to the battlefield, you will die on the battlefield. On the battlefield, you do not use technique, you use your intuition. Okay, the first rule of samurai culture, of Budo, the samurai martial arts, was, you can find it on Wikipedia, it's one of the few things that is accurate on Wikipedia. The first rule was, speak sincerely. So, speak sincerely. Why? Why was it so important for a samurai who wanted to develop his intuition to speak sincerely? Because the samurai intuitively understood that every time you speak sincerely, you literally punch a hole in your ego. That's exactly what speaking the truth means. That's exactly what sincerity means. Speaking sincerely means that you show something that people usually hide behind their outer ideal images, behind the veil of appearances. So every time we speak sincerely, we speak from our most vulnerable point. We decide to take the risk. We decide to push something through the ego, through the ideal image, and to show something that we hide behind the ideal image. So speaking the truth is always speaking in a vulnerable way. Speaking the truth always makes you vulnerable. It makes you vulnerable in the world of illusions. It makes you vulnerable in the world of the appearances, in the world of the ego. And it makes you stronger in the real world, the world of the soul, literally. Because every time you speak sincerely, you literally punch a hole in your outer ideal image, and through that hole, you reconnect. You start to resonate again with what is around you. You become a little bit that little child again from before it was 6 months old, which had this intuitive, perfect knowledge about the entire world around it. So I believe if we want to live a more embodied life, if we want to reconnect, the first and most important thing is always to find the courage to be vulnerable, to find the courage to speak sincerely. So I could go on for a long time about this, but I won't do it now. But that's what I believe, my 2-cent word opinion about how we can live a more embodied life and a more connected life.
I think it's wonderful. I would echo every sentiment, and indeed, while I was thinking what I was going to say, my topic was going to be truth, basically. That speaking the truth connects one to reality, connects you to other people as well. People sense that you are a truth speaker, and so few people are that it creates a bond. The key thing about being true is that it's not just a right proposition, it's being faithful to what is. True to. Are you true to somebody? Are you true to your lover? When you get married, you plight your troth. That is the same word as truth. True is, carpenters talk about surfaces that are true, that marry indeed, that meet up. And this is where we need to be. That's all I'll say because there's no time to go on.
Beautiful, beautiful note to end on. I'm so sorry we can't get to everybody's questions, but you're more than welcome to email us at support@iainandmcgilchrist.com if you have a specific question for Mattias. We're happy to forward that on. For Iain, you probably, and I'm sure Mattias is inundated as well, but for Iain, we tend to hold a 3-month Q&A for members of Iain and Mattias where he selects certain questions that he'll answer in a live Q&A. But such beautiful questions and insights from you, Mattias and Iain. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And just a truly beautiful evening, actually. It was stunning. So thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Mattias, for being my guest and agreeing to come. And thank you all for being here.
Likewise, thank you, Iain, for having me on. Feel honored, and thank you for all the people who were here. And
we must talk further on another occasion.
We will. There's so much more to say. Yes.
So much more to say. Yes.
Thank you, Mattias.
Hopefully you do it publicly again.
Yes,
thank you.
Event. Yes. And thank you to Jay. Thank you to Jenna. Thank you for supporting this evening.
And thank you, Mary, for holding the whole thing together, conceiving it and bringing it to birth. Thank you for that.
Amazing. Thank you, everybody, so much.